introduce our keynote speaker, I'd like to welcome to the podium the chairman of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce Board and the chairman of CHS, Wayne Smith.
He has served two terms as the mayor of Knoxville, where he increased residential and retail growth while continuing to operate the city under a balanced budget. That's something different this day and time. During the first 2 years as governor, he has taken the lead in reforming public education by connecting teacher tenure to student performance and opening enrollment to charter schools to all students. He is also committed to improving college access, increasing educational attainment rates, and enhancing workforce development efforts through public and private partnerships. We especially appreciate and value the excellent working relationship that Governor Haslam and the Nashville Chamber has. The governor and his staff are always willing to listen to our ideas, concerns that we represent for you, our members, and for that we are very thankful. It is my distinct honor to introduce and welcome to the podium the 49th Governor of Tennessee, Bill Haslam.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you. Thanks. Please. Thank you. Please have a seat. Thanks. I really appreciate the warm introduction. Some of you have heard me tell this, that people sometimes when they go around, they say, man, it must be really nice. Every time you get up, everybody gives you a standing ovation. You know, every joke you tell, people laugh. How do you get used to that? And I said, well, I have vivid reminders all the time. I had one 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was at the, actually it's more about a month ago, I was at the Lady Vols Lady Commodores basketball game. And those of you who've been to a basketball game at Vanderbilt know the benches are behind the goals there. They're not on the sides like they are at most stadiums. And then right behind the benches, there's an empty row. And then there's a first row of fan seating. And I was sitting there and was sitting next to Pat Summitt. And whether you're a Tennessee fan or not, you have to admit that Pat Summitt is one of the greatest Tennesseans ever. I mean, she's 8 national championships. You know, like I said, 8 national championships. Actually, every girl she's graduated who's finished the that has finished the program with her has graduated. It's an incredible story. And so we're sitting there, and because there's this kind of walkway in between us, every time there's a timeout, somebody comes up to talk to her, and inevitably they would kneel down in front of Pat and they'd say, Coach, I just want to tell you it's such an honor to meet you. I can't tell you how much you've done for the state of Tennessee. I can't tell you how much what you've done has meant to all of us. And then they'd notice me and say, oh, and you too, Governor. So, get used to that. This is a great day. This is the, actually, I think Ralph talked about this in his comments, that we were named the 3rd freest state. Governor Ramsey and I, Lieutenant Governor Ramsey and I always argue that we want to know who those 2 folks are ahead of us. But here, in one measure, I know we're the very first. Actually, you're living in the second tax-free day in Tennessee right now. What do I mean by that? The tax organization, I can't remember their actual name, but they measure the total amount of taxes that every citizen pays by how much money they make, and then they measure when you're done paying your taxes for the year. So if it takes you if it's 33% of your total income goes to taxes in one form or another, then when 33% of the year is over, then from then on you're working for yourself instead of for the government. Tennessee has the earliest tax-free date of any state. March 31st, 2 days ago, you quit working for the government and started working for yourself from here on, which is good news. You might say that's about 3 weeks ahead of the average person in the country. How's it compared to our neighbors? Georgia, they're having to work 10 days longer for the government than you are. Okay, that's why they're trying to steal our water back. We're actually having a contest. Somebody said, you might have read that Georgia's arguing that a surveyor 150 years ago messed up. Surveyors never mess up, do they, Lieutenant Governor Ramsey? No, he's in the real estate and auction business. The surveyor 150 years ago messed up where they marked it, and so down around where the NACC Lake is, Tennessee River, they're saying that's supposed to be where the boundary line is, and they're supposed to get that water which they could use for Atlanta. And I jokingly brought up, well, you know, we'll think about giving them access in trade, like we'll take the Atlanta Braves and they can have access to the water. That raised a lot of people with different opinions. Immediately I started getting emails said, no, trade them for Sea Island. I also got a few votes for Lenox Mall and Phipps Plaza, and the discussion went on, but we're not actually going to trade them their water. We like our deal. By the way, those of you who are wondering, if you live in Connecticut, Georgia, like April 10th, Connecticut, you're going to pay until mid to late May. I'm not sure when, if you live in California, you get to quit paying. I think about Christmas time, but just suffice it to say that you have a better deal than they do. I want to thank also something Ralph said about that is true about this room. In government, we talk a lot, and I'm going to cite numbers about jobs created in Tennessee in the last 2 years and all that. But at the end of the day, we all know this, and it's one of the things I appreciate about Lieutenant Governor Ramsey and Representative Carr and Representative Cassada. We don't create jobs. Jobs are created when people put capital at risk, period. That's the only way a new job is ever created. Government can create jobs, but to do that, we have to take money from you to do it, so there's no net new job created. We do it when people take risk. I learned that lesson early when, like I said, when I came to work for our company, my dad had started it 23 years before that, but we were still fairly small where we were. We just came across a concept that we thought we could take nationally, and we made that decision, but it involved a lot of putting capital at risk. And my dad, because he was in his 50s and my brother and I were in our late 20s, we naturally had a little bit more aggressive risk profile than he did. And he was certain we were going to, ruin things by going and putting this capital at risk. But at the end of the day, that's how things grow, and that's how businesses prosper, and that's how communities prosper. And as the governor of Tennessee, and I know that Joe and Glenn and Ron will agree with me on this, it's incredibly impactful what is happening out of the greater Nashville business community. The business growth here is amazing, and we've built a reputation around the country, not just because we have a TV show now, but for being the kind of dynamic business climate and that has the kind of quality of life where people want to live. And I hear that everywhere I go, and I'm well aware that while we might help a little on that up on Capitol Hill, it's because folks like you are willing to put capital at risk. Our job is to try to help you continue to do that, and I can promise you that we will. Since we took off, like I said, first I say, well, government doesn't create jobs, you do, and now I'm going to brag about how many jobs have been created in the last 2 years. But we have, there's been 80,000 new jobs created in Tennessee in the last 2 years, and a couple things I may be the most excited about. Manufacturing jobs have increased faster in Tennessee than any other state in the Southeast in the last 2 years. And per capita income, which I think is a very valid measurement for how things are going, per capita income has increased faster in Tennessee than any other state in the Southeast. We've recently announced an international strategy. When the state's economic development department, we look at that, a lot of times we look at how we're going to recruit businesses from foreign investor nations to come here. But what we've said is one of our key missions should be helping Tennessee companies export their products. And so we have recently opened export development offices in Mexico, the United Kingdom, China, and Germany, and with Germany serving the entire European Union. Our goal is to increase exports by 10% in the next 3 years. Site Selection Magazine recently named us in the top 10 states for economic growth, and Barron's Magazine named us the third best managed state in the country. And again, Lieutenant Governor Ramsey and I are like, well, what's this third stuff? So, but competition is good. One of the things I think is key to that is what I said earlier in terms of keeping the tax environment where you need it to be. I think it matters that in Tennessee, like I said, you quit working for the government 2 days ago, and now you're working for yourself, because I honestly believe that means you'll invest more of that money into capital and create more jobs, and we're created to have that continue to do that. The other thing that we're working hard to do is make sure that we have the legislative environment in place for you to grow your business. We've had several key initiatives there recently. Last year, we overhauled our tort laws, and it has made a difference. I've had several companies come up to us and say, we decided to come here because of this. I've had doctors come up and say, my rates have gone down. And I think because of that, we've created a better environment. Another thing we did 2 years ago to do this is to introduce what we call a new law that makes it easier to set up captive insurance companies. It's not a real exciting topic for a lot of people, but it is critical because there actually are some people down here it's exciting to. There's 2 whole tables of people that think it's exciting, but it actually thanks to their help, because a lot of folks in this room helped show us it's another opportunity to create more Tennessee businesses. It allows us to companies here to create their own insurance company to control risk and lower their premium taxes. Tennessee is now one of the few states where you can cover your workers' comp claims through your captive insurance company. And last week I signed an amendment to the captive law that makes Tennessee even more attractive for captives. I do want to thank Representative Carr and Chairman Cassida. They played a big role in that, and the Tennessee Captive Insurance Association, who is here. And those are things, again, that's about making it better for companies to do business here, and some of those, by the way, have added quite a few employees because of that act. We continue to focus, like I said, not only on making things better in terms of how we serve you, but in terms of preparing the workers that we're going to need for the future. Anybody who's heard me talk is tired of hearing me talk about it, but I do think in Tennessee we can compete with anybody. We have an incredible quality of life. We have the low tax structure in place, but it is about preparing the workforce for the future. It's another reason I'm so grateful to the National Chamber. They've played a leadership role for a lot more, since long before I was here, in tying the connection between education and job development. The link is inextricable. We were recruiting a large company, and still are, company from Asia to come here. It's going to look at hopefully maybe adding 1,000 manufacturing jobs, a headquarters location, R&D facility. It's the kind of company that you, if you're in my job, that you long to see come to your state. And at the end of the day, after a long day, we'd shown them all over Tennessee, various sites. We're eating dinner downtown here, and the principal looked across and said, I'm only going to come here if you can promise me that if we come here, our children aren't going to fall behind in school. You know, that's about as direct of a message as you can get. Fortunately, again, thanks to a lot of help from the legislature and a lot of leading from people in the business community here, we're making progress in Tennessee. Last year, our TCAP scores showed the highest aggregate gain in state's history. 55,000 more kids tested out as proficient in math, a key skill we're going to need, and 39,000 more in science. So we are on the right path, and maybe most encouragingly, we were one of the only, I think we were the only state that had a double-digit graduation rate increase, which we're going to need to do. But we need to continue that to the next step with higher ed. Unfortunately for us, not enough folks in Tennessee have a degree beyond high school. And every time I bring that up, somebody says, well, college or community college isn't for everybody, and it's not. But it has to be for more Tennesseans than it's been for in the past. Right now, 32% of us in Tennessee have at least a 2-year degree. 10 years from now, very solid estimates are that of the jobs out there will require that 55% of those have a 2-year degree. Well, if 32% of us have a 2-year degree at least, and it's going to take 55%, we have a huge gap to make up. It's about 500,000 net new folks that have to have at least a 2-year degree. So here's the scary part of that. If we graduate every child in the next 10 years from high school, and that's not going to happen, unfortunately, that every child will graduate, and every one of those graduates goes on and gets a 2-year degree, that will get us about halfway toward our goal. So a little bit of an eye-opener, right, in terms of being competitive out there in the market. That's why we're trying to put a real new focus on the 900,000 adult Tennesseans who have some college credit but not a degree. We're introducing some programs like Western Governors University, an online competency-based school that will help reach out to that 38-year-old single mother with 2 children who's working 40 hours, and there's no way she can go back to traditional school. We're looking at a lot of creative approaches like that because we have to have a competitive workforce to get where we need to be. Ralph mentioned, both Wayne and Ralph have mentioned the recent decision about Medicaid, and I'm going to take questions here. I'm trying to rush through this so we can save 10 or 15 minutes for questions, but we'll take questions on that. A little bit of background. Some of you are in the healthcare industry. You know this, and you've been sweating through the details with us. For some of you, it's a fairly new topic. But to try to summarize it, When the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, the new Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, however you want to refer to it, passed, it was immediately challenged in court as to whether or not this was legal, basically whether the individual insurance mandate was legal. The Supreme Court came back in the ruling last summer that you remember and said, yes, the plan is legal, but the part that's not is forcing states to expand who they cover in Medicaid. In the past, states have paid about a third of the cost. Well, it's different depending on the state's income level, but Tennessee has paid about a third of the cost, and the federal government has paid 2/3. The new plan going forward in the Affordable Care Act says for the first 3 years, they'll pay 100%, and after that, it will go down to 90%. But even that, because it forced states, once they went down to 90%, to carry a portion of the cost, the Supreme Court came and said, you can't make states, said to the federal government, you can't make states expand who they cover because they're paying a portion of it. They have to decide. And so that left all 50 states with a very big decision to make. And again, as I've said before, some people thought it was the easiest, people on both sides thought it was the easiest decision ever, depending on your perspective. Some people said it's the easiest decision ever. They're going to pay for 100% for 3 years. After that, they're going to go down to 90%. We have hospitals who are losing some of the money that they get for covering indigent patients. That's part of what they lost is the revenue that the federal government brought back for the Affordable Care Act. You have to do that to protect hospitals. You have to do that for all these folks who won't be covered. Other folks said, no, 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 you've got it wrong. It's the easiest decision ever, but it's the easiest decision because the answer should be no. The state has seen, we've seen this movie before. We've been to where TennCare took over 33% of the entire state's budget at one point in time. And we had to cut people from the rolls, and we don't want to go back there. And those folks would cite even President Obama, who said back before he was president and then right after he was elected that Medicare and Medicaid are broken systems, and the wrong answer is just to pour more money into them. And those folks were saying, no, let's fix it first before we decide to grow it. We looked at it in Tennessee. We actually spent a lot of time studying, and everybody, I guess a week ago tomorrow, tomorrow, so 6 days ago, we made the announcement of what we were going to do, and it frustrated people on both sides. I guess that's what happens sometimes. But those folks who wanted us just to expand, I didn't feel right saying that because I do feel like there's a better way to do health care reform in Tennessee. And the folks who wanted us just to say no, I couldn't turn my back on the fact that there are people who legitimately need to have health care insurance who don't have it, and the fact that our hospitals and other providers, some of which are going to be in fairly tenuous positions because of this, that they were going to be left with less revenue coming in because they're losing what's called their disproportionate share payments, the money they get for covering indigent patients. Our thought was this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to truly have health care reform by this. We think the Act also will allow us, instead of just taking the Medicaid and money and putting more people into TennCare, which I said we have a troubled history with, to do that and to buy people into private insurance. Now, this is actually the kind of coverage that almost everybody in this room has. And to do that, when we did that, that also left us in a unique position with our health care providers, in the sense that now they have a lot of people who aren't being covered at all now, but they would be covered, and not just at TennCare rates, which pay about 65%, is that roughly right, of what insurance rates would pay, but they'd be covered at insurance rates. That would allow then those providers to say, okay, we really will work with you on payment reform, on doing those things that are outcome-based. And we're blessed here in Middle Tennessee. We have a lot of the leading healthcare providers who have literally come to the table and said, we can do this. The cost differential, once the federal government goes from 100% coverage down to 90%, we can make up that difference for you. We know we can do that. We need this period where those folks are going to be paid, who we weren't getting paid for before, to help us cover that. And so we have gone back to the federal government to, it's under Health and Human Services, but it's the Center for Medicaid, Medicare Services, CMS, who you're dealing directly with, and said, let's do this. Let's show a way to have true alignment in health care. At the end of the day, here's what I think all of our issues are, no matter where you are on this, is health care is one of those few things in where there's no market tension at all. I shouldn't say no, but there's not much market tension. For the user, there's not that incentive to say, how am I going to lower my costs? Because the example that I quote a lot of times, that's from Governor Bredesen's book. If you've never read his book, and I know it seems funny for a Republican governor to be referring to his Democrat predecessor, but in healthcare, he nails it. It's a book called Fresh Medicine. And he compares it to going to the grocery store, walking through, shopping, and occasionally somebody from the store coming and making a suggestion to you, and then going to check out knowing that somebody else is going to pay the bill. But you can't convince me that's the way to have the most cost-effective system. And so this is a one-time opportunity to do that. Now, the feds have certain laws around Medicaid patients and the sort of treatment there, and what they should pay for and what they shouldn't, that we cannot ignore. But we are in active conversations with them to have a system that, like I said, is true health care reform that will, at the end of the day, lower costs. I think if we can do this, it will lower our costs in Tennessee, and it will, every dollar we save will save them at least $3, them being the feds, and maybe as many as $9 for the time when they're matching us 9-to-1. So some folks say, well, you're off on this, quest that really is a fool's errand because there's no way you'll work this out. My argument would be this really is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to do it, and shame on us if we don't take the opportunity to address that. I honestly think the potential is there. I've got one thing to wrap up with before we finish, but we'll come back to that. In the meantime, we'll just go straight to questions about Medicaid or anything else that you would like to talk about. Yes, sir.
As the legislature this year winds down, if you can fast forward to next year, what do you see on the horizon as top issues?
This an honest answer. We're being governors it's a wonderful job, and I never ever complain. But the reality is you kind of have, during the legislature, you have two jobs, if you will, because we're still, we have this 40,000 employee state organization that does everything from run prisons to build roads to run kindergartens and PhDs, all the different things the state does. And then while the legislature is in session, you have another additional job of working with how many bills this year on? 1,500 bills to help shepherd them whichever way you think is best. So we will start when the legislature gets out, which will be in 2 or 3 weeks. 2 weeks, the Lieutenant Governor Ramsey said. We'll sit down then and focus on what's coming next. I think from us, if you said what's a no-brainer thing that I'm pretty sure we'll see some new initiatives from us on it will be higher education. Like I said, we need to address it both in terms of the number of graduates, increasing access for Tennessee, the cost. Not just us, but everybody's almost in danger of pricing higher ed out of the reach of middle-income families, and we think we can come up with some unique ways to do that. And then the quality of making certain that the graduates we produce are the ones that you're saying you need. And we're trying to be a lot more attuned to what the market is telling us there. So I don't, like I said, I don't know for sure what we'll do next legislative session because it's so far off and we're in the middle of this one. Like I said, a safe bet would be a higher education focus.
Can you describe your STEM education initiatives for the next 2 years or even beyond that?
I sure can, and thank you. And Tennessee State will play a role in that, so I appreciate the question. STEM, obviously, is the science, technology, engineering, math disciplines that we need to increase our focus on. And so, like I said, we're seeing initial results, and that's why I gave the 55,000 more high school students who are proficient in math and 39,000 more in science. So we're on the right path there. We're doing it through a combination of things, some very focused STEM academies in all of the larger cities around Tennessee. We're doing it by introducing the STEM disciplines within the different school districts around the state. But then I think maybe the thing that we're probably where we've tweaked the system the biggest is by where we're putting our capital for higher education. If you think about it, in government, our job is the same as yours. The two most important things you do are who you hire and how you allocate your capital. I would argue that that's what defines it, and there's several bankers down here that put their money at risk for other people, and I'm thinking they would agree with me that when they go in to evaluate a loan prospect for a business, they're saying, what's the quality of the talent here? And are they allocating their capital in the right ways? And so in state government, that's our job too. And we have to make certain that, particularly when it comes to higher ed, that we're allocating our capital in the right way. And that means putting it where the market is demanding it, where we need it. So if you look at our capital budget for higher ed for the last 2 years, you would see a preponderance of investment toward the STEM disciplines, because we think those are the graduates that are needed. And I think we're doing everything from the University of Tennessee, allowing them to expand their engineering program as a test, to new science building in MTSU, and I can go around the state and point you examples of kind of how we're allocating our capital to meet that demand.
Can you talk a little bit about plans for mass transit and where that is on the list of priorities for the future of Tennessee? Thank you.
Yeah, I sure will. And you can't talk about mass transit without talking about where we are on transportation funds in general. But we do have a coming issue, and every other state in the country does, in that there are literally less of those dollars which are set aside to fund transportation of any kind. So that is a cloud that is facing us as we look at mass transit possibilities, because most of those mass transit possibilities require subsidy funding from either state or local or federal government. And right now, we don't have the kind of flexibility where I'd say we can take on large new projects. I see some folks from the Metro Transit Authority here and some other folks who have worked on some very creative ways to do that. And as mayor of Knoxville, I did the same thing. But I think I'd be being a little disingenuous if I said, oh, we have a grand new plan for how mass transit's going to work, absent a way to pay for it. Because the feds have actually cut back on their money there as well. So I think it's one of those issues that is, it's not going away, nor is the question of how we're going to pay for it. I just don't have either one of those answered right now. Okay, Ralph, you want to? Okay, Ralph asked about exports and how do they connect with our international efforts. Our Economic Development Department, like I said, is working on a great strategic plan. Summer Ali, who works in our Economic Development Department, heads that up, is over our overseas operation. If you would contact our ECD department with your interest, they would love to follow up on how they can help you increase their exports around the globe. Well, thank you very much. Let me just end by saying really what I started. It's incredibly important to us that you do two things. One, that you continue to invest in your business and to make it a place where people want to work and so that they'll want to come and live here. But secondly, that you stay engaged. The Lieutenant Governor and I have conversations all the time about how critical the issues are facing us as a state, particularly the issues that are before businesses. And it's equally important that you have a voice and that you have an effective voice at the table. So your membership in the Chamber, I know you do it for your company's own good, but believe me, the impact is even bigger than you think it is in terms of their advocacy, whether it be education issues or issues before the legislature. So thank you for being a part of this, and we're grateful.